Hello and welcome to a great event today. My name's Amit Patel. I'm the head of construction practice at the RICS. It's really great to see everyone here today. As I say, good morning, good afternoon, good evening from wherever you listen to. We've got a great subject today about circularity in the real estate and what that means for our industry. And we've got a great panelist here today as well. I'd like to kind of welcome everyone to the World Built Environment Forum webinar series. And today's webinar is in partnership with Drees Sommer as well today. First of all, I'd like to kind of introduce our kind of esteemed panelists today, Mina Hassman, Alexandra Podvin, and Simon Joe. Mina, would you like to introduce yourself?
Thank you, Amit. First of all, thank you for inviting me to be a part of this event. I'm really thrilled to be here with you and other panelists. I'm the Sustainability Director at Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. For those who may not know what SOM is, we're a global interdisciplinary design practice of architects, urban planners, interior designers, and engineers of any kind to really aim to advance the agenda of sustainability and more so addressing the priorities of the climate action and climate change in many aspects of our work. So I'm really thrilled to be here to talk to you more about our experience and expertise on circularity.
Brilliant, thank you, Mina. Alexandra, would you like to go next?
Yes, thank you, Amit. Thank you for having me today. As the Director of Technical and Asset Management at Beaumont Real Estate, I'm responsible for the management of the portfolio of separate accounts, which includes mainly large office assets in France, which need value enhancement. I'm also a member of the ESG committee at Beaumont. And for those who don't know Beaumont yet, Beaumont Real Estate is a private equity firm investing in Western Europe, primarily in France and UK. Beaumont was created in 2017 by 5 partners with a track record of over 25 years of real estate. We are a team of 18 real estate professionals today and have over 2 billion euros of assets under management invested in value-add funds, core plus vehicles, and separate accounts asset management mandates.
Thank you, Alexandra. And Simon Joe, how are you doing? You all right?
All good. Hi, Amit. So as you said, my name is Simon Joe. I lead a team of engineering and technical sustainability experts for Drees Sommer UK, as well as representing a company called IPEA in the UK, whose focus for the last 40 years has been circular materials and products. So yeah, we focus on everything. As a company, we work across real estate, all sorts of consulting disciplines, from building surveying to project management and engineering and sustainability. My team focuses on everything from decarbonization through to green building certifications, with a focus or USP really on circularity, which is why we're so keen on the session today. So it's great to be here.
Brilliant. It's great that we've got such a wide range in the panel. You know, we've got all the way from kind of investors to kind of designers, architects, consultants, and then you've kind of got the consulting arm with Drees Sommer as well, putting all that into practice. Circularity is kind of been, I say, a buzzword for the last few years, and I just trying to get the kind of audience up to speed about what it is and how widely circularity has been adopted by not only clients but by local authorities, governments, councils, etc., and the awareness among them as well, and then within your respective sectors. I wondered if Mina, do you want to open this one up in terms of what does it actually mean to you?
I'm more than happy to. Thank you, Amit. I think it is a very critical topic, and I'm really thrilled that we're discussing this during today's session. Circularity is about ensuring that the existing resources are valued for many more years or much longer than their anticipated life. And typically we design buildings, use materials to last for a certain period of time due to their durability and sort of stability perspectives. But I think if we can find opportunities to enhance and extend their lives, then we can greatly contribute to this concept of circular economy and circularity. And to be able to perhaps answer the second part of your question is, I think circularity is definitely gaining traction in the real estate and construction sectors, with much greater increased awareness in comparison to the previous years among clients about its importance, because it's a value add, not only from a perspective of reducing environmental impact, embodied carbon emissions, and so forth once we reuse materials and give them a second or third life. But it's also a value add for investors, for clients, for developers to save costs and save money in the long run, because they'll be repurposing and reusing existing materials rather than drawing on virgin resources and materials that are often quite detrimental to the well-being of the planet, as well as from an economic perspective. And I would say maybe among those, in terms of adoption, I think even though there is a greater awareness risen about circularity over the last few years in the industry globally, the degree of adoption really varies across regions and industries. And we see often first-hand experiences with some of our clients or those that we come across under the umbrella of SOM. We see that investors and or more progressive developers that are working to more stringent environmental regulations, ESG criteria, and so forth, are much more proactive in embracing circularity and really understanding the value of circularity, whereas others may see more of the implications of relatively increased upfront cost or barriers of insurance and so forth of existing materials, that they tend to shy away a little bit more in implementing circularity rigorously. But maybe I'll just stop here to give an opportunity to other panels to bring their perspectives into this important question. But thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Mina. Alexandra, what's your view in terms of and why it's important?
Yeah, I'm in line with Mina. For investors and asset managers, circularity is more and more widely adopted. We see a big evolution in the last 5 years, as we see in general in the sector of ESG. Of course, awareness and implication depends on the size and the origin of the investor. This is what feedback via our investor benchmark show us. When we talk about size, important big investors are already organized for years in the ESG sector and have a good vision of circularity as well. But smaller value-add funds like us, our main competitors, seem to get organized also in the last 2 years and catch up with where we were already on the topic for the last 5-6 years already. Talking about location, we see that the Nordic investors are, of course, pushing much harder than the US investors, and I guess we're in a trend which goes more down after the elections. And I'm working on the French market more than on the UK, and what we see is that UK market is much more advanced in recycling and avoiding waste than France is. We see also that communication is very, very important in this field. And so we see lots of initiatives like Circulab or Booster of Reuse and lots of organizations today on the market. And also more and more laws in France about waste treatment and responsibility of materials through the whole lifetime of a material, actually. At Beaumont, if I can finish by this, we integrate circularity into our asset vision and the strategy, and this depends on many factors. Of course, in terms of value creating, we need to anticipate what our client wants. And I'm not talking only about our clients which are invested in our funds, but also the buyers of the assets that we sell after value enhancement. And we need also to align with our global engagement as responsible investors. We need to respond to our targets, which we have set up on all levels, company, fund level, and asset level. And operationally, it depends case by case on the size and the complexity of the development, taking into account timing and budget, of course. The varieties in our portfolio go from whole building approach, like on a building in London on Fetter Lane, and finish in French, refurbishment of towers where we have single initiatives. What we note is that even if most focus is on energy efficiency and carbon reduction, actually circularity is already present in lots of exchanges, and they really help reduce our carbon footprint. But more about it later. I give over to Simon.
Yeah,
thank you,
thanks.
Alexandra. Appreciate it. Simon, it'd be great to get your perspective, from, I say, the lower end in terms of, the actual doing the do with the clients and what the challenges that they're facing.
Yeah, thanks, Amit. I'm going to, just for the sake of interest of the podcast of the webinar, I'm going to be controversial. I think I totally agree with both me and Alexandra that circularity as a topic is getting traction, it's getting interest. People want to be talking about it, people want to be shouting about it. I think what I see on the market is that it's not very well understood, and it's often something to shout about, that without fully understanding what the potential is or how it could be delivered. So I think in terms of how widely it's adopted, I would say there are parts of circularity adopted and pushing, boundaries and pushing into the mainstream. But there's a huge economic potential of circularity which isn't quite there yet. And to kind of substantiate that, what I mean is, we work so through Patel, the company, our subsidiary who I mentioned previously. We work a lot with manufacturers and kind of the products. And what we see a lot, so I'm based in the UK, what I see a lot in the UK is the more visionary clients prioritizing reuse, prioritizing refurbishment of buildings, which is definitely the first priority. But that the scalability, if we're talking at a product level of reuse, and therefore its impact on kind of carbon and on wider supply chains is limited. Particularly now that kind of logistics and supply chains aren't really geared up to doing that. And we talk about advantages of circularity around economic, kind of commercial benefits, which have to be negotiated because they're not the norm. Circular contracts are not the norm today. We talk about carbon, which is probably where circularity is mostly targeting now, in the UK at least. We also talk about health, which nobody talks about, because ultimately circular buildings, circular products, if our supply chains are going to be circular, they need to be free of toxins. And actually the product, what we put into our buildings and the buildings themselves are made up of such complex materials that it's very difficult to understand what's in them. And the result is quite poor air quality, which you can go some way to helping through very high ventilation rates, but actually that's causing a problem and fixing it by creating another problem because you've got energy consumption there. So I think there is a lot of potential in circularity, which I can speak about some of the projects that we've done, which start to knock on that door. I think that the topic is getting a lot of traction, but in terms of what it can really deliver and what it really needs in terms of engagement, it really needs supply chains to take on the challenge, and to change the linear business models that we're used to, and that's not there yet. That we sit on projects and have those commercial conversations because it's not ready off the shelf. You need a consultant to help you push those boundaries. So I think there's a distance to go before true circularity is really available to everyone and therefore can be fully adopted. But I think the topic is definitely gained a lot of traction, and that's only a good thing.
Thank you, Samjo. I think you touched on the point of that. We always do the traditional route, that kind of linear route where you kind of always buy new. because the client wants a bright, shiny building. And it's that awareness of actually, you can reuse. There is an opportunity to do so. I want to kind of come into the fact that, what's that level of awareness with the clients, and are there different sectors that are taking it on board a lot more easy, or is it more client to client base? It'll be great to hear from you, Mina, about, is there particular sectors that are streaming through it, or are they all lagging or in that infancy level?
I think this is more on a client by client base cases. I don't think it's maybe there are certain patterns, like for example in residential properties, it's more difficult to recycle, reuse, repurpose existing materials because there are so many different parameters, especially in relation to health, that one needs to consider and be much more perhaps mindful of. And I'm not saying other sectors or other building typologies aren't, health is not important in them, but there are certain sectors where there will be a much more a critical eye put on the process of how an existing material can be repurposed or reused in comparison to others. But example, residential versus warehouse buildings, I'm thinking of from the top of my head. But I think even in that scenario, it's a case-by-case basis, because every existing building, existing product is almost like a unique case on its own. And that's why it needs to be evaluated in that uniqueness that it presents. And that's the reason I think I wouldn't recommend, or I wouldn't want to generalize and just say, this is the definitive pattern that we see, and this is the definitive type of clients that we are struggling to engage much more rigorously than others. Hopefully that helps answer your question.
Yeah, and I think it does. And I think, when Alexandra was talking about her clients wanting to do this, is it more from an investor point of view? Is it kind of shareholders, pension funds that are driving this, or is it kind of individual clients who actually want to kind of reuse existing materials that they've got in their existing estates, whether they're doing cut and carve refurbishment works, that they want to kind of prolong that? So kind of I want to understand that kind of drive. Is it more kind of investor led, or do you think, or is it clients willing to do this?
No, it's a whole, I would say. Actually, we at Beaumont, we have decided more than five years ago about our process to become sustainable as a company for our funds and for our assets. And so ESG is not anymore a nice to have for us, but it's a must be. We have, we are aligned with UNPRI. We're doing our GRESB benchmarking for 2 years now. We have even developed science-based targets, and actually we need to respond to all the processes we have set up. This is the way we work, and it's as I said, it's not nice to have. It's a must have. And actually we have this vision which we give to all of all the investors. And of course there are investors which choose us for this line, for this direct line we have for sustainability.
No, that's great. Sam Joe, do you think this particular sectorized in the work that you're doing, or kind of what Mina was doing, it's kind of client based, or at the moment, so is it client choosing to do this, or are we seeing a sector that's actually leading the way?
I think circular economy, being also a commercial proposition, is more easily adapted to specific sectors. Yeah, I think take structures, for example. Reusing a steel beam is technically very possible, and there's great uptake of that proposition. When you reuse a steel beam, you need to find where that's coming from. It tends to shrink a little bit when you take it out of a building. Clients that the kind of commercial offices, those kinds of buildings, seem to be taking that up more quickly than residential or logistics or other sectors. I think this is driven by who owns the building, who develops the building, what clients are asking for.
Sure.
This is the bigger picture of how each sector works, which are quite different. You know, some sectors are more volume driven, some sectors are more premium quality driven, like offices at the moment. So no, I think it is sector divided by sector. I also think that within that, it's divided by clients. You know, I think Alexandra and Beaumont are, you know, kind of in the front of the pack in setting ambitious targets and in driving creative solutions to achieve those. That's not, you know, it's not every client who's doing that. So it's segregated on both levels.
Brilliant. No, thank you so much, Joe. I want to go to kind of our next question about is that, you know, how is building design shaping circularity, and what are some of the kind of standout examples? I always think that, you know, if you get the front end right, you know, if you kind of making those choices or those optioneering phases where about circularity, the kind of design then follows. Simon, do you want to carry on with that at the moment?
Sure. I mean, I think it would be nice to hear from Mina as well, but I'll send some slides through, so maybe we can run through those, just to add some visuals really to what a circular building something like and what we've done. So the first one I wanted to talk about was a project that reached PC in Belgium last year. So if we look at the next slide, we've got the old buildings and what they then became. So if you go to the next slide, there you go. So these are two towers, enormous, kind of floor area, and there was really a question of, you know, the client came to us, the developer, saying, how do I attract an ambitious tenant into this space? How do I kind of compete with all the other buildings which were also saying they're sustainable? So we fully urban mined the two towers on the left, and that informed and kind of created the towers on the right. With a very different design. So the one on the right is mixed use, fully flexible between different uses. So the space that's now an office is designed to be able to become resi or whatever else it needs to be. If we go on to the next slide, we've got, so it'll come in a second, but yeah, essentially, this design was very much driven by circularity. Right at the beginning, we did a very detailed inventory of what's in the towers, and worked very closely with the demo contractor as well as with the demolition contractor, as well as with the supply chain to figure out what could be reused. So we worked with, you know, the market as to who needs material A, B, or C, but actually 0.6% of the building's mass saturated the Belgian reuse market. Now, this is a reuse market that exists, right? The UK doesn't really have a reuse market yet. Belgium does, and 0.6% was all we could achieve before the market was totally saturated, and the stuff that we provided was sitting on shelves and costing, right, in order to sit on shelves. So working with the supply chain, this is the really big result. So rather than you know, good glass from the windows becoming aggregate in roads or becoming beer bottles, and same goes for, you know, all the other materials, we sent them back to the manufacturer, and the glass became float glass for new high spec windows. Now that is a big technical step, and that project has kind of boosted Saint-Gobain, who we worked with, to be able to do that, and that's now becoming. You're now seeing that across a number of pioneering projects in the UK and elsewhere. And we did the same thing with 31% of the building's materials, managed to kind of recycle or upcycle them. I think it was, I've got a slide later that shows that percentage. It was 25% upcycled, which is enormous in terms of your carbon, the difference in carbon. But as well as the difference in carbon, it's also enormous in what it's enabling the supply chain to do, and how it's, you know, the supply chain is using these projects to understand how circular commercial models work, and we supported them in doing that. If we look at the next, start flicking to the next slide. I don't want to talk too long on one. Sorry, I should have brought these up earlier. Onto the next one. So this is what it actually looked like, right? So we weren't looking at what's a nice architectural element. that we can take and reuse in the new space and kind of shout about it, which is a great thing to do. Telling stories about this stuff is really crucial because it spreads the word and it's tangible. We were looking at volume and commercial scale. So this is kind of what it looked like. This is some of the stuff that we recovered from the building. And actually, the end result was a reduced demolition cost by 10 or 15% because the value of what we took out was much higher, even though we had to work with the demo contractor to redesign how they demolished, or in this case deconstructed, the building. And we needed new processes for taking down windows, and the logistics changed entirely. So that it needed work, but actually the end result was commercial result rather than anything else. So the next one is another picture of some of the suppliers that we worked with, just to kind of show what that scale, how we achieved that scale. So I think the next slide is the pie chart that I mentioned before, where it kind of divides the result into percentages. So as it measured by building mass, reusing or keeping the existing core structure in the basements was 66%. Stayed on site. So that's plus some elements within the building, but driven by the structure. So that's absolutely, like I said before, the first step. But actually, the big result for me is that 25%, because that really needs that is really shifting the needle on how buildings can be developed and how And one thing I didn't mention in an earlier slide was that of all the new materials that went into the new building, because we needed some new materials, 97% of them, or no, sorry, 97 was the target. Is that 97 or 98? I can't remember. Percent of them were cradle to cradle certified. So this is that's not available off the shelf. These are materials that go through a rigorous certification process to assure circularity, and that will impact the tenants of this building and their their scope 3 carbon for the lifetime of this building. So yeah, really quite an impact and quite a different way of going about designing a building. So if we move on to the next example, so this project that I've just mentioned in Belgium was kind of driven by urban mining and what can we recover from the existing building. And as I mentioned, that the key there was really connecting the kind of the city scale, the building scale, with the products and the material scale. Without that, you're just writing demands of specs on contractors who've never done this before, on supply chains who are unable to deliver it. So really connecting those dots is crucial. The next example is one in Germany called the Cradle. And this is really an example of let's say more, when you say how does design impact circularity, the next slide shows a picture of the building. This is a timber exoskeleton building, more classically what you would consider what you consider the design process. And if you go, so on the next slide, if it works, I've got a little video of us integrating a building material passport, which focused on circularity and circular metrics, into the BIM model of the design. And through that, if we go to the next slide, through that, we're able to optimize to really interrogate the building from a circularity perspective, looking at disassembly, looking at separability of each component, looking at recyclability. So how much of the materials that we're putting in how much of that material is or that product is secondary versus primary, and then how recyclable is it at the end of its life. So looking at that, both of those metrics, looking at carbon, embodied carbon, breaking down circularity into what actually drives real circularity, and then being able to bring it into the design and kind of present it to the design team, to clients, was really a really powerful design tool. And the end result was that the building is entirely disassemblable with hand tools. Now, of course, that needs security measures, so you can't just walk in and take down the building with your own screwdriver. But actually, in terms of functional flexibility, that can be done quite easily in terms of maintenance. And all of that, if you go on to the next slide, all of that was captured in material passports. And that was only possible because our role in the project was a circularity coordinator. So we skipped the next, there we go. And that coordination role was really working integrated with the supply chain and looking at, we through the project, we developed the first cradle-to-cradle structural timber product available, because we looked at how is this timber held together, how is it treated. Most timbers have glues and have biocides on them, but you need to use the right glues, you need to reduce biocides and make sure that there aren't any toxins in these products so that they can be part of a circular economy. And it was through that kind of vision of the client and through our role as a coordinator, really kind of interrogating the science behind circularity, that we were able to achieve the building we did. I think I might have another slide or two, but I think they just maybe add some visuals to what I've just said. But yeah, hopefully that gives a bit of an idea of my opening statement, really, which focused on circularity often not being kind of addressed scientifically, rather being another word for reuse. Was actually there's a really much deeper fundamental kind of economic proposition here, which supply chains need to respond to, and really, it depends on the project how you approach it and what the impact, how impact is going to be driven. But there's a lot of potential there to exploit that I think the market in general doesn't fully understand yet.
Do you know what, Simon? That's a really great example of it. Yeah, it's a really great working example of what can be done. I'm assuming you want to talk about.
I was just going to come. I think just mention also something to add to what Saijo has talked about with a great case study example that he particularly shared in his slides. I think it's important to sort of not forget that sort of one of the key tenets of circularity is about embracing sort of longevity and long-term responsibility and accountability as a mindset. And this is going back to Saijo's point as well, that the supply chain needs to work together. And I said I think this is a given, perhaps, and it may sound very simple, but unfortunately it's not still the industry standard practice today. And I think this, for circularity to be a reality in any of the ambitions to become a real outcomes in projects that we may be setting as benchmarks for at the very beginning of a project, we really rely on this sort of close collaboration within the supply and even the wider value chain of a built environment, even bringing the unusual stakeholders, if I can call them that way. And I say unusual because typically at sort of design stages of any project where all these ambitions you often set around circularity, we usually collaborate with the usual suspects of engineers and architects and possibly sometimes, and not always, contractor or the subcontractors that may come on board during the construction stage of that project. But we rarely have direct conversations with manufacturers, direct conversations with insurers. I'm perhaps generalizing this to make an argument, but I think this is not the industry standard practice, and we need to be able to bridge those conversations to ensure the ambitions that are set for a material, a product, a building to be truly circular beyond that project's phase and that initial life that we're designing for. To become reality, we really need to bring everyone together. And I think buildings in that scenario, going back to your question, Amit, really play a key role, because they are the tools where we can test these ideas, where we can bring these different conversations together to ensure that different aspects and the challenges of circularity can be overcome. And the second point I sort of wanted to mention, so the first is about collaboration and bridging conversations and actions amongst the unusual stakeholders. The second one is about understanding that there are different degrees of intervention when we talk about circularity. I think often the industry has been culprit in segregating, almost like making a black and white distinction of you either reuse existing materials almost as they are, or you just discard them and send them to landfill. But I think there are other opportunities that we need to creatively and innovatively, and I speak as an architect and environmental engineer, like we need to really challenge ourselves to bring novelty in the way that we think about design and that we think about how the existing materials products can be repurposed. And I'll give a brief example of this. And I know this is not always the ideal. There's a hierarchy of how one should approach circularity and reusing and reusing and repurposing existing materials or products or existing buildings. But even though it's not ideal, if we cannot reuse an existing material as it is, and I'll speak to an example. One of our most recently completed constructed project called Corsa Italia 23, which is an office development from the 1960s, an existing office development in Milan, Italy, where we have sort of reused existing buildings, but also creatively thought about how we can reuse existing materials that could not be reused as they are, because in the 1960s they were not designed to be demounted or deconstructed. So there was this beautiful red granite, which no longer exists apparently, on the existing building's facade on one of them. And the moment we start sort of pulling out the material and we wanted to use it as a new sort of facade material in the new sort of renovated design that we envisioned, we could not use it because it started crumbling, because it wasn't designed to be demounted. And Saji also talked about this sort of the bonding agents and the materials are so important to consider when we're designing elements of a building. But because we could not use it as it is, we still did not sort of lose the fight and said, okay, we cannot reuse it as it is, so we're gonna sort of send it to landfill. But we actually worked together with the client, with the contractor on board and sort of the subcontractors and so forth, to find opportunities to repurpose that material. And eventually it was downcycled, so it was crushed because it was crumbling anyhow, turned into an aggregate that can be put into sort of molds and then recreated into these sort of stone elements or facade elements that are actually currently being installed on the existing building. So none of the material that was taken away from the building was sent to landfill, and they were all sort of recycled or repurposed on site throughout a process so that they can find a new life in the new vision of the retrofitted building. Mindful when I say this, and this kind of downcycling and reusing may not always be the ideal scenario, because it requires sort of energy input, it required investment of money, and also it required investment of in terms of upskilling the construction team to be able to use this sort of material. But I think what I'm trying to say is that we should not forget that there could be different opportunities or different degrees of intervention to an existing material, to an existing building, and it's not always just a black and white, we use it as it is or we disregard it. Sort of that mindset, I think, needs to be changed within the industry.
That's great. I think you're right, and we as professionals kind of have to advocate this in terms of that change, because I think we're driving this change. It kind of leads into the next question about what are the key challenges of sourcing these materials, because if we do the traditional route, we're always just going to get the traditional result, right? So in terms of sourcing materials that are upcycled, recycled, or within the circular economy, what are the components that we need to support the circular economy, and how can we overcome these barriers? Simon, do you want to say this one?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there certainly are challenges in sourcing materials that do not come from primary resources, and materials that can become that can stay in use. I think for the latter example, certifications like I mentioned before, the cradle-to-cradle certification, are rigorous assessment that it checks logistics, it checks components and chemistry, it checks separability of it really looks at can this material be circular, and it also looks at what's in it. So is it made of primary or secondary stuff? I think so that's kind of on a kind of manufacturing product level. Going a little more macro on a kind of building project level, yeah, it's hard to find this stuff. I think we're starting to see supply chains of reused materials become available. We work with a platform called Circularity, who are creating. They're the first platform to enable futures trading of materials. So the idea is that if you know, generally, a building owner and asset manager will know this building's going to be, I need to refit floor 10, or the whole building is going to be refurbished in a year, in 2 years. You inventory it then, because then you have the lead time to work with the supply chain to find other places for it to go and to list it and have and list your materials in your space and enable someone to buy them. So you're enabling commercial value of that stuff, rather than you start the retrofit or the refurbishment and you say, right, in 2 weeks this needs to be off-site. Let's implement the circular economy, and of course then you don't really have the time to find a new life for it, right? Or to create the commercial arrangements that everyone wins if you do that. Was futures trading model enables that. So I think that, these supply chains are developing, but I think it does need designers, clients, and asset managers, developers to challenge their design teams, and the design teams to challenge supply chains to provide these, right? Ultimately, if I want a window, where do I go? Do I go to LinkedIn, or do I go to a window provider? Probably, when I need quite a few windows, I go to a window provider, right? So actually, the window provider is really well placed to be offering materials and components that support circular economy principles. But they're not going to change their whole commercial model unless they need to, right? Unless they see a real demand. And it's that those conversations need to be intelligent. Like Mina said, they need to bring in questions around insurance. They need to bring in the unusual suspects. But these conversations need to be happening, and it needs the usual suspects to be challenging the supply chains to provide this. On the Zin project, which is the one in Belgium that I mentioned before, all of those materials that went back to suppliers were recertified, re-warranted, and came back to site. Like that is really a really meaningful change, and that was only possible because there was a big building with volume, and we worked with the suppliers so that they saw the opportunity, and they developed new commercial models. Right, it wasn't available off the shelf, but because we challenged it, it becomes available. And we've done that in Europe. In the UK, a little less is available, but these are the same suppliers. So I think that more could be available if the opportunity was really recognized. So yeah, I think that there are some significant challenges because of the youth of the sector and the youth of the model. But there are opportunities and possibilities as well that aren't always explored.
I mean, could I also come in just to add to Saijo's, I think, observations that he's kindly sharing here? I think the two other key elements that I want to bring to the attention of everyone here is that one is there's lack of understanding and awareness of what circularity is and what circular economy is, and how can one design for circularity, or how can one sort of implement circular processes and practices in a day-to-day work. And this is relevant to designers, engineers, all the key decision makers, I think, name it, within the built environment sector. And I think maybe and this may sound very simple, but I think it can make a fundamental difference, is that if we can sort of raise our general level of knowledge around circularity and share examples. I think the examples that Saijo is sharing here today, and I briefly talked about our Corso Italia project in Milan, I think sharing more of those case studies and precedents of how certain challenges of circularity may have overcome, and also how different degrees of intervention, as I called it before, have been implemented and so forth, can really give, it sort of can raise not only awareness on circular practices in general within the built environment sector, but it can also shed a light on how some of the challenges that others may be using as a reason of not shying away from implementing true circular practices in the projects that they're working on, can really help people give a bit more hope and a bit more real life example of how they can think about the challenge that they may face. So I think increasing awareness on circularity, maybe to a certain extent climate literacy, can make it can go a long way, I think, within our industry. And this is every part of our supply and value chains when we talk about truly embedding circular economy within the built environment sector. And the other sort of aspect, maybe in relation to this, that I was going to mention, I briefly mentioned the sort of the skilled labor shortage around this. It's not about also raising awareness, but also making sure that there's skilled, contractors and subcontractors and so forth that can really ensure that this becomes a viable, commercially viable option. Because often we experience this with our Corsa Italia project, that when we added sort of the layer of circularity into our design approach and wanted to find a new life for this existing material, and that wasn't very straightforward. We could not, as I mentioned before, cannot use the existing facade granite as it is, and had to go through this process, and that required investment of and slight extension of the design process, and also slight extension to the sort of the construction time of the project. And not every project will have that opportunity to allow for that extension. So we need to make sure that we work together with, and there's enough skilled construction sector to be able to deliver on right now, even just the basics, but moving forward, we'll hopefully uncover more challenges and even greater innovative ways of embedding circularity in existing buildings moving forward. So we really need that skilled laborers to be able to efficiently deliver on this ambition, so that it doesn't become an economic burden to the client, and that may be rightfully the only reason why they may not want to engage with circular economy thinking or design ideas or practices in the project that one is working.
Thanks, Mita. Really kind of thinking piece around what we can collectively do. I want to move on to about the challenges of kind of reusing recyclable materials and the components, and what are the kind of what do we have to do to kind of overcome those kind of fears? Because I think a lot of people think that it's a premium good, it's a premium service when things are kind of reused, because there's a lot of manual handling, there's a lot of kind of components that need to be put back into place, the certification, there's kind of insurance, whether it's fit for purpose, and the longevity of that kind of reused material. I wonder if you can kind of expand on what your thoughts are on this.
Yeah, maybe I can come back to one of the points from Mina. She said we need to challenge ourselves, and I'm in line with her, because we need to overcome all these challenges. We need, what is most important, some humans, an inspiring team, and motivated members of the project to push circularity and everything around it forward. We need this to overcome challenging situations. And why do we say challenging situations? Is because of all the cases that we saw, for example, in refurbishments in Paris. From my side, I can tell about this. Our first timers, every time, nobody has done it before us. So one of the big challenges, and you talked about insurance, I will put it a little bit larger. For example, responsibility. We had a case where we wanted to reuse fire petitioning in a high-rise building, but fire brigade doesn't like uncertainty. So what do? We couldn't reuse the material if we didn't go to the original manufacturer. So this is what we did. We went into a partnership with the original manufacturer, and he repainted, did some small fix-up, and so we were able to reuse a big part of these partitioning walls. The cost went down for the landlord because the renovation was more costly than the new construction. The timeline went down as well for us, because we didn't need to wait the manufacturer. We could have even at the end a good carbon solution, because we didn't need to transport back the most of the modulars to the factory. And in total, we had a win-win situation. The manufacturer was happy to be on this construction project. He didn't lose a tender, and he had a good way of communication marketing for what he has accomplished in this project in terms of environmental gain. So this is one of these little stories we have around circularity today, where we are very proud of. We also have what we also noticed, that in the past we have been confronted, and you said it before, Amit, contractors always gave us a better price to do new than to give us recycled. So what would you choose if you were asked? It's always a question. And but in the last time, we see laws in France giving more force to the manufacturers to be responsible of during the whole lifetime of materials, and construction players are also more organized. The big construction companies, they know how to take profit from recycled materials and not seeing it at lose of profit anymore. Maybe I can come to some of the slides I brought for you today from the refurbishment of Ariane Tower, because here this is an example that we gave new life to a 50-year-old tower, and by thermal renovation, redoing the whole facade, we gave a new life of 40 years, we think, to the whole tower. What was very challenging in this project, actually, we had 85% of the office levels occupied, and 100% of the activity still open. A cafe, an entrance hall, a fitness, and all the office levels, actually. And we did this. It was a first timer, as I said already in the beginning, because usually towers, they are emptied, they are refurbished and then re-let. But our challenge was not to empty the tower, and so let the tower produce an income during the whole construction period. This is a big advantage, of course, for the investor. When we go to the next slide, please, we have in this project been able to recycle 95% of the glazing. Of course, we couldn't do it on the same project, because the time we took out the little glazings you see in the top of the tower, we already, or the company already constructed in the company, the ones that we pushed up from the basement, and on the next slide, you will see the part where we are most proud of is the reuse, or the reuse and the recycling of the metal shields, because the architects in our case had a good idea, and you see it on the next one. They set up chandeliers constructed with these shields that were decoration in the tower, in the entrance hall. So this made not only an example of reuse, but a nice story to tell during all the marketing visits. And I think this is one of the question of the panel, which came in, take on the tenant on the storytelling of a project. This is what actually we realized with this reuse of the shields in the entrance halls. And of course, the last 95% of these metal shields were reused in the industry. So I think these examples, they show quite well that the implication of different partners, constructors, architects, and as well project managers that we needed to create, implement or push forward different initiatives on create material reuse. We need collaborative, cross-disciplinary approach to bring to life circularity in our investments, and that's what we try to do as much as we can.
Thank you, Alexandra. I just want to kind of move on to our kind of a next fielding question, which is about, in your view, what's the most effective strategies to kind of increase circularity within the real estate industry? Mina, I'll kind of come to you if you want. What can we do to start kind of implementing things?
Thank you, Amit. I think this is a great question, and I think it has a very simple answer. At least one answer that I can give is that actually embedding circularity, that thinking into projects from day one. Often circularity is similar to other sort of sustainability topics, if I can crudely describe it that way. They usually come as an afterthought in a project where once the design is progressed well or once the key decisions are taken. And I think for circularity to be meaningful and successful, it needs to help inform the framework, the roadmap, the processes that the project is being designed, whether it's renovation or new build, and that it's constructed and in use, and also how it is even operated and maintained once it's live and occupied. So I think really bringing these ideas and the key principles of circularity are on day one into projects, and really championing it across the wider group of stakeholders and getting their buy-in and their willingness and responsible and acknowledgement of responsibility and willingness to contribute to that circularity roadmap and end vision is critical. And I also think maybe the other more sort of tangible and sort of measurable outcome of this process can be to ensure that not only that the thinking and the processes are embedding circularity in the given projects, but also that there's a clear definition of roles and responsibility within the stakeholders, so that this kind of thinking needs to be embedded within the almost, I'm going to dare to even say, contractual obligations, so that it's not just nice to have, and that yes, we all sat together and agreed on this, but no, we're going to be held accountable for delivering this at the end of design stages, at the end of construction, at the end of construction completion, and so forth. So that I think embedded accountability and responsibility, even in contractual terms, can really help shift the way that a project is delivered, and the processes are enabled within projects. There are many others that I can talk about, but I think even if we can get those right, which is happening literally on day one on any given built environment project, then we'll be a long way than where we are currently in terms of embedding circularity on or sustainability ambitions in projects.
Yeah, I think it always got that fundamental client brief. If we can get the client's mindset thinking that actually the first point is circularity, or kind of reusing materials that we may have on the market or within the estate or that they already have. And I think if that's embedded within the team ethos, then that kind of design follows, I think, and it should kind of filter through. Simon, you kind of wanted to come in.
Yeah, trying to lean in. Thank you, Amit. I think one of the most effective strategies partly depends on who you are in that value chain, right? So a strategy for Mina looks different to a strategy for Alexandra. I think it's really kind of, I think Alexandra's presentation on kind of the Ariane project and how they did that, keeping tenants in the building, right? Like thinking about these projects a bit differently, thinking of them from a commercial perspective as well as an environmental perspective, I think is a game changer, right? So, and I would almost challenge, if you're a designer listening to this call, if you're an architect listening on this call, I would kind of challenge you, try and put yourself in those shoes, right? If your objective is not circularity for the sake of circularity, but rather circularity for the sake of carbon improvements, but without compromising, investment value or without compromising income potential, like how do you then go around it? And I think when you start to think that way, you start to realize that actually you need quite a few people at the table, and the approach to achieve circularity is very collaborative, and like Mina said, needs kind of consideration fairly early on. So when you start to realize this, the potential of circular economy starts to land on the table, and then it kind of grows legs. I think where we often go wrong in the built environment sector is, a well-wishing or well-willing engineer or architect or client kind of has an agenda and wants to say, we want to do circularity, but without really putting the effort into understanding the other person, the other stakeholders' priorities or how they work, or working with them collaboratively to make it all fit together. And this is really a puzzle that needs to all fit together to work, because it's a circular economy. It's not a carbon reduction, right? It's not like a single metric that needs to come down. It's a system that needs to work better together. So I think that kind of collaborative approach and that value proposition is a really important starting point, and a really important kind of key that unlocks it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. Look, we can talk I think a couple of hours on this topic with all the information and the expertise that we have here with our guest. Look, I just want to say thank you to all our panelists, and especially Drees Sommer as well. And thank you again today for your views, your kind of insight, your slides that you've shown today. And I think it's a very thought-provoking subject. I think it's still very much at the infancy. I think a lot could be done from clients all the way to governments to and the supply chain as well, because I think there's a lot of effort needed in terms of upskilling people, additional cash resources, and tax incentives as well for clients to kind of take on board some of the topics that you talked about today. Look, we just want to make sure that we say thank you to our panelists here today. We've got their contact details if you want to reach out to them and find out a little bit more about what they do and how they work. And if our kind of members and audience are really interested, please do reach out to these people. They are, I say, living, breathing this work at the moment. So thank you very much to you guys. Really appreciate it. And thank you very much. And thank you.